I am Amber, and this is the NZ Culture Online session that we're going to run. So my co-facilitators with me are Dan and Bronwyn. I'm just going to run through like super quick sort of housekeeping. So Nicole is our kaipapa person for the room. So just a reminder, please be respectful of others' opinions. Please be mindful of continuously talking for an age. We want to hear from a diverse range of people and hopefully everyone in the room, but don't feel pressured to talk. Also, just to remind you that this session is being filmed, and so to make sure that we get audio with the film, we need you to speak into a mic, so they are the talking stick. So please make sure that if you're trying to have a point or a question to ask the room, make sure that you have one of these. So Bronwyn, Dan and myself will each give about a 5-minute chat just to scope up what our thoughts on this session would be, and then we want to chuck it to the room and have a conversation. So I guess my view on the session was that some of the questions that I wanted to ask was, how does New Zealand tell our story online through global platforms and content providers with the likes of YouTube and Netflix coming more prominent in our households? How do we ensure we maintain our culture and tell our stories without losing our identity with the mass of the online content? And then also, how do we create content and how potentially can we showcase New Zealand content to the world? Because I think we're pretty awesome, but, you know, I may be biased about that. So, Dan, did you want to... That was my 5-minute. Yeah.
My 5 minutes will be the same. And would you like me to sit here? Because I'm with my back to some people, so sorry about that. Can't stand it. All right. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Dan Shannon. I'm from the Documentary New Zealand Trust. We are a not-for-profit charitable organization that promotes documentary films and filmmaking in New Zealand. We exist for the last 11 years. I'm the executive director of the trust, together with my co-director Alex Lee, who presented in the previous session. And the trust is promoting, as I said, documentary films and filmmaking in New Zealand, and looking into content and presentation of content is very much in the heart of what we try to find and figure out day in and day out. We run a series of events and activities throughout the year. The main one is the Documentary Edge Festival, which just completed in May and June in Auckland and Wellington, and that's a film festival celebrating documentaries from New Zealand and around the world. This is one way to present New Zealand content, but not online. I'll get to the online in just a second. And then we run also a series of industry activities like the Screen Edge Forum, the Doc Edge Lab, and the new development that Alex touched about in his presentation earlier this morning, Story Edge, which is all about the new way of telling stories outside the big screen and the small screens. So the small screen, which we mean is television, but Story Edge is all about creation of storytelling via other platforms. So we are based here in Auckland, and we just completed our 10th anniversary, working now on the next year activities. And back to the subject of New Zealand content. This is a challenge for filmmakers in New Zealand, and especially in documentary, how to get your film seen and your work seen and have our story told. We work, you mentioned the online platforms, Amber, and QuickFlix is one example of an organization we established a relationship with. And now you can watch certain documentary edge films, local films, on QuickFlix. But there are so many other online platforms, whether it's Vimeo, VOD, Netflix, which is now a new player here in the market, and others. So by having a choice, filmmakers actually do have more power to decide where they would like their content to be seen on. But at the same time, it creates a challenge of how to negotiate those terms and how to get their films on these platforms, because they all have slightly different kind of setup. So we are here as an organization that can assist. So if you do create a story, create a film, a documentary in particular, we are more than happy to discuss that with you. What's the best platform? When you make a film, a documentary, the main thing is for the film to be seen. And the traditional ways of film festivals, which we run, and television are rapidly changing. One of the things that we are very interested is in creation of an online film festival. This is something that we have been talking for and thinking about for the last couple of years, but the challenges is how to create that platform. So again, this is something I'm just drawing here in case there are interested parties in this concept of reaching out to audiences beyond the experience of coming to a festival and seeing the film on the big screen, but how to get to other audiences around New Zealand. We run the festival in Auckland and Wellington. How can we reach audiences outside those two centres and people that are in those two centres who may not be able to attend the physical event, to come and find those local stories. The other point I wanted to make is about what is New Zealand story. We are dealing with the broadcasters here in New Zealand and the Film Commission to a certain extent with a little of a problem when you come to them for funding, because they want to have a New Zealand, not only angle, but to have a New Zealand content. And what we, as the Documentary New Zealand Trust, are saying is that it's enough for you to be a New Zealander telling a story, that this is the New Zealand angle. You do not have to have a New Zealand character even, or a New Zealand storyline. We have an example of, I'll give one example of Pietra Bretkelly, a local filmmaker who is making a film at the moment about Afghanistan. This is a New Zealand film. She is a New Zealander telling that story from her point of view. And this is the type of stories that we would like to see more and more, and we would like the funders to fund more and more. Not to be so narrow-minded that it has to be a story from here. It can be a story from outside, told from a New Zealand point of view. So, those are the two areas that I wanted to raise. There is the whole conversation around what is a story, New Zealand story, and what should be funded in that regard, and also how to get your stories or the story on the screens, any screen, big or small. So that's, I think, my 5 minutes. Thank you. Ooh, perfect. No birds.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Bronwyn Smith, and I'm actually here as an artist. I'm a producer of content and a New Zealander, so I guess that makes it New Zealand culture of some sort. And I've actually been using various online platforms to, put my work out there and also incorporate them into various art projects. So my background is really in fine arts, but using new media like 3D printing, for example, film, video installation to communicate various ideas from a New Zealand perspective. And I'm really interested in this topic, I guess, from the point of view of an artist, and also the word culture, because I think that can mean a range of things. And I actually looked up the word culture and found two kind of overarching definitions. And the first talks about the creation of art and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. So that's really about the kind of high quality art production, people who are very serious about making high quality artworks in various media and disseminating them wherever they do. And the other kind of side of that is the ideas, customs, and social behaviour of a particular people or society. So this is what I think of as more of an evolutionary or fluid definition of culture. And I think if you separate those two, there's obviously overlaps, but if you separate them, then you can start to think about the work that Dan's doing in that first definition, where, there needs to be institutional support, or in a lot of cases there are cultural producers who actually do a lot of work individually trying to get their work out there, but could do with a lot of support. And I was thinking of a couple of examples of that. One is of a project that the Dowse Art Museum in Lower Hutt did at the end of last year, where they staged a Wikipedia editathon, because they identified this real problem in New Zealand of communicating information on Wikipedia in particular about our artists. There are a whole lot of artists who have been practicing for decades who are just not represented there, and particularly female artists. So they brought together a whole lot of writers and staged a session where they created Wikipedia pages for these artists. And I think that's a really great example and a real kind of a good one for us to think about, because there's still a lot of things that aren't documented up there of New Zealand creators. And the other one I was thinking about is a website called Circuit, which is a website set up by a curator, Mark Williams, who gets funding from Creative New Zealand, and he advocates for New Zealand film and video artworks. He actively contacts artists, he sources their work, he uploads it to Vimeo and has it accessible on his website, and then he also does a lot of work looking for international opportunities to show those video and film works. And I've actually got work up there that's been shown through Circuit in Berlin, in Italy, and also in the International Film Festival. So that's a really extraordinary example of an individual really with a passion for promoting New Zealand work, taking it under his own steam to advocate for that and push it externally. So I think that's a really cool example. And then if you think about the more social definition of things, there, I guess we start to get in the sense of social media, of people uploading kind of more whimsical cultural moments that happen to them in their various little subcultures. And those often get uploaded to these large platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Flickr, Vimeo, what have you. All of these things are stored offline, and so, or offshore in other countries and data centres. And so there's kind of this, and I guess there's the separate session happening about data sovereignty, where there are these artefacts being produced that aren't actually being kept within New Zealand boundaries, and I think there's a bit of a risk there. But anyway, those are the kind of various thoughts that I had. So, yeah, I think I'll hand it back to Amber.
So I guess it's a question to the floor, is what were people's thoughts? Does anyone have anything they wanted to have a chat about some of the awesome projects they're doing, or expectations on what they thought this session was about? Are you in the wrong session? Anyone? Yep.
Hi, my name's Nina. I'd like to hear some more examples of what's going well. What are people doing right? What are some amazing interactive or online or otherwise creative bits of storytelling and art that people have seen recently?
Kia ora, I'm Chrissy Butler from Core Education, but not really with that hat on. I'm in a band called the Mr. Sterile Assembly. I guess just a comment, really. So we've been rocking around for about 13 years, and in the kind of midst of crowdfunding at the moment for an album, which is now become a commonplace activity for bands trying to get work out. And just kind of comments to the room or to the panel around the skills artists need to actually make getting their work funded work. So, like, I've quite a lot of kind of informal experience around video, and so I can bring that to the project. But for lots of musicians, you're kind of stuck in you can be stuck in a bit of a vacuum if you don't have access to that kind of cross-genre, internet-friendly skills and that social media connections and ways of working. So just yeah, what are people's thoughts?
Anyone?
Yeah, I guess I just talked to what skills do artists need to get funded, and I totally hear you, because you can have all the skills in the world to produce amazing works, but getting them funded is a completely different story. And I think there's you really need a lot of writing skills to be able to apply for funding applications. You need to have research skills to understand who you're actually writing to and what their interests are. And then you need a really strong spine so that when you get knocked back time after time not getting funding, you kind of can keep going. I think the crowdfunding example is really interesting because that's kind of taken off, but I kind of wonder how far we can go with that. And certainly I see, more and more examples of partnerships emerging through crowdfunding with projects that have already been backed by other organisations, and I think particularly Kickstarter in the US. There are Taika Waititi's example is one. Boy, where he had studio backing to release that in the States and then went to crowdfunding as well, which I think film studios are doing more and more. And that's really dangerous because it's going to create a culture of scepticism around funding artists, and I see that as having a really negative impact. But certainly being able to use video to communicate that idea in a snappy way is almost like you need a marketing background to be able to make really good use of that. So, yeah, I don't know whether marketing funding for artists to help produce funding applications is, but maybe that'll be a new thing. I don't know.
And maybe I can add to that, because funding in New Zealand for this kind of work is still kind of a challenge. It's where to find it. There are some new initiatives by New Zealand On Air with their new digital funds. So we're starting to see a bit more in that area. But I think relating back to the session this morning, when Alex was talking about creating your community, this is what the funders are looking for. So when you come to a funder, any funder, with your idea, you do need to show them, other than this is a cool idea, who is the community, who is your audience, who is going to interact with your content. And on the point of social media, not social media, the crowdfunding, that can be a bless and a curse. Because even with crowdfunding, there is a lot of things to know and to research before you launched it, because there are some great projects that are doing very well and some that flop and don't do so well. So you need to know how to market your project, how to attract people to go to that platform and make them make the donation and support it. I think that in that regards, there are some great examples of success and example that you can learn from projects that did not do so well. But the skills or the things that when you need to have, I think, is to have your idea very clear and have hopefully a team or other people with you. Those are what the funders looking for, and learn more about what they ask for and make sure you answer tick those boxes that they're looking for. I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that. I think that collaboration is really important. We all tend to work in silos. We tend to work in very small areas, and there's a strength in being able to draw on the skills of other people. So any opportunity for you to go to any creative mashup or gathering where you can actually share your stories and share your ideas so that you can meet new people that can potentially add to your story is really important. Proposal writing, you're quite right, is extremely important. You need to know what your story is. You need to know who your audience is. You need to know exactly what it is that you're trying to pitch. Because no one's going to give you any money until you've got that very clear in your head. Story is king. It doesn't matter what media you're in, whether it's, whether you're looking at audio or visual, or you're looking at print, story is king. The whole idea of being able to tell the right story to be able to get the support of the funders is really important. When we pitch these days in the audiovisual world, we don't just use a written pitch. It's really important to be very comfortable with your oral pitch, but you need to also make sure that your audiovisual supporting materials are very strong. So if you go to any pitching session where anyone is pitching an idea, you'll find that part of the pitch comprises of audiovisual presentation of where the story is. If they've got some materials that they've pulled together, some really strong subjects that can talk to the story, that's going to be really important in selling it, because people get drawn. You know, they need to invest in the story and invest in the people. And it's really hard to just use words to do that. You know, we are getting more and more of a society that relies heavily on being able to see. And I think that's really important to be able to have that as a way to present. The question about what type of projects there are, I think that, you know, I'll give you an example of a really amazing project. Once again, I'll go back to the National Film Board of Canada, because I think it's really important to go there. If you're really interested in the way the internet or the way online has provided an opportunity to build a community, it's something called Do Not Track. Do Not Track is one of the most amazing pieces of work that's come up recently. What it is specifically is about the whole area of surveillance. It's all about the area of data mining. It's all about how we have a cyber identity. So what it is that you go in, there's a whole series of stories, and within each chapter, the whole series of sub-stories. You start plugging in your information, and halfway through you plug in your first part of the information, it throws back the information at you, and it'll tell you exactly what they found out about you. And it goes from looking at you using Facebook to you using your phone and using a torchlight and all the information that's actually being dragged out. And it's an amazing story, because when you get into that, it is a documentary, but it's a community tool, because you start to understand exactly what problems there are with cybersecurity. It also gives you an opportunity to interact with other people. And for that reason, that's a really amazing one. And another one that I'll tell you about is something called Fort McMoney. Now, Fort McMoney is a real-life interactive story about a mining town in Canada. Now, the mining town in Canada was putting together a proposal to get a pipeline running right across Canada. And obviously, with a pipeline running right across Canada, there are all sorts of environmental concerns. So Fort McMoney is a story that starts off with a beautiful documentary, beautiful clips, and then it takes storytelling away from its linear pathway, because all of us know that storytelling starts from Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. What it allows you to do is to enter into the story at any point, get information, jump here and there, and be able to still continue on with the story. And it builds you this huge, big, amazing platform where you can take part in referendums, get information. It's an educational tool. You can take it to schools. You can share your own stories. You can upload your own videos. So all it does is create this democratic platform. I know we talked about a lot, sorry. We talked a lot about journalism today, but I think that what's really exciting for me is how the internet is allowing democratic storytelling, and what it is allowing us to be the curators. We decide what we want to listen to, what we want to watch, and how we participate.
Okay, so maybe, did you want to speak first? Is this on? Oh, yeah, it is.
Hello, hi. Hi, is it on? Yes. Well, there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of days about the rollout of the UFB to the regions, and it seems to me a lot of this wonderful stuff's happening in the urban centres, and I'm kind of thinking about what happens when we're talking about getting people in the regions taking up those opportunities that they have available to them. When Amy Adam talks about how are you going to justify UFB coming to your community, and she's obviously, as she would, come from a point of view where the councils have to justify it from so economic or business point of view. And I'm just wondering about what happens when those people get online and what kind of stories they find about themselves when they get there, and how can we get them telling their own stories in those using these platforms when we're trying to get those people to engage with the opportunities that are there. And I just want to make sure that we keep these people, those regions, as part of the conversation. I think that's all.
I'm David from the 2020 Trust. I just wanted to go back to the funding discussion, which was happening. Just to put some icing on the cake, I've had some experience in the community sector at funding applications. And I've got here Generosity Online website, which I encourage all groups to look at, because there is a list of 1,200 funders in New Zealand that you can look at, both local and national. So depending on what you're doing and trying to achieve, there may be a fit. So that website has just been revamped to Generosity New Zealand from the Funding Information Service. So it's a very valuable resource. One thing I'd say is that funders, particularly philanthropic funders, are interested to help, but they want a clear picture of what, and I hesitate to use this word, what the outcomes are. In other words, who's going to benefit, to what extent and how. So it's knowing your audience, but it's actually knowing how they're going to benefit from what you're doing. So you can clearly articulate that to the extent that you're more than likely to get a tick. The practice, or what happens is that quite often funding applications will be accepted. You will never get what you ask for, and you always ask for less than you really, really want. So you've got to be realistic, but you've got to tell a story about how it works for the people you're trying to help or serve. Okay?
And just to sort of reiterate, there's the guy that just spoke you. I was at GovHack last weekend, as were you, and it was quite interesting. This is a thing called GovHack. It's quite techie, right? And so all these people get in there and start coding away and building stuff, which is great, you know, websites and apps. But actually, what they wanted was a video. And so all you had to do was produce a video about your project and what it was that you were going to build, which was really different, and no one was expecting that, and people got their energy into the wrong place mostly. But it was interesting that that's what they chose, was a film, and the story was what they were after, rather than actually a website.
Hi, my name's Chris Lipscomb, and I work in Aotearoa, and I want to go back to that conversation about getting regional voices online, because that's the kind of culture that I'm interested in. And I'm really interested in what people in this room might know about what facilitates that. What kind of initiatives or organisations or creative labs are actually being discussed now or put in place that actually allow people with their own voices, their own customs, their own practices, which may be art with a capital A, but maybe art with a small a as well. And how do they get online? How do those people become comfortable in working online? And what does that then look like, of course, which is really interesting as well. Now, my title is Economic Development Manager, so yes, I do have a kind of a business and, you know, wealth and jobs type interest, but I also have an interest in a community thriving online because it's a precondition for all that stuff happening. So I'm just interested in what other people might know about. Like, for example, I heard that there was a semi-permanent creative lab, you know, that had been set up here in Auckland. I've phoned a phone number that I found on Facebook. I've left a message. I haven't heard anything. I don't know whether it still exists. But those kinds of things I'd like to know more about.
All right, we've got Narelle and then Nat. Oh, Nat.
So lots of people have been talking about funding stuff, representation from people who we don't typically hear from, about writing really long grants. In the last probably 5 to 10 years, have seen not a lot of new artists that kind of cross over into people who are not kind of creative space. So I work in tech, I'm not in the creative space. In the last 18 months, I've probably come across more creative people who are not white, old, straight, any of the conventional things, because of the wireless. I don't know if you guys are that familiar with it, Radio New Zealand's youth site, but they offer grants for people to make content. And there are cartoonists, and there are videos, and there's music, and there's all sorts of things. And I think people get really caught up in traditional funding models and in getting audiences in the old ways. And I think it's really interesting to see the young generation come up through those alternative channels, through the networks that they build differently, watching Toby Morris's cartoon go all over the world, and the opportunities that gives someone like him, or Pinky Fang, or Jim Yoshioka, or any of those amazing artists that we're seeing come through. And maybe think outside that kind of let's write a grant box. We have an amazing public broadcasting network in places like Radio New Zealand who are seemingly keen to support some of this stuff, so look somewhere else maybe.
And the thing I like about the wireless is the diverse way in which they tell stories, and they have a diverse population that tell the stories, and they're also young people. Oh, look.
Hi.
Hi, Megan.
So I'm Megan from The Wireless. So when we sat down, so The Wireless has been a thing in progress for like 5 or 10 years. So for a very, very long time, there was talk of a youth radio network that is financially unsustainable now. And so about 3 years ago, we sat down in a meeting room and said, okay, cool, we're going to build a website for young New Zealanders. And the chief executive, the then chief executive, Peter Kavanagh, sat us all in this room and we went, cool, we could do this and we could record gigs and release albums and it'd be amazing. And then he came back after lunch and said, cool, you're going to have funding for 3 staff, so you're not going to be able to do any of that, go away. And so 3 of us, then 4 of us, sat in a room for about 6 months figuring out what the wireless was going to be. The hardest part of it was deciding on a name. And a really important part of the kaupapa was nurturing young talent and telling diverse stories. And, you know, we do as much as we can in the regions, although it's very, very difficult. And yeah, we have funding from New Zealand On Air specifically for that, and it's for multimedia content. So it's for video and audio, and Toby's cartoon that has now been seen on our site by 1.5 million people, on Bitly by I think 6 million, on the Huffington Post and BuzzFeed, Funny or Die, and a whole bunch of other websites in India and China, and you know, it's insane. And yeah, we do have funding for any young people who want to make content. But also Radio New Zealand is really keen to hear about that. And Alex made the point that the story is key, and that is where we come at from everything. And whether you are doing crowdfunding or you're funding, the story should be the thing that you know at the beginning, because that's what it's about. It's always, always about the story.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to respond to a few points actually, but I guess I'll start with responding to your point about artists looking more broadly for funding, and I think that artists do look really, really broadly for funding, but different art forms are funded by different funders, and if you don't fit the box of being a young artist to get funded by the wireless, then you can't go there obviously. So yeah, I'll just say that we are looking broadly. And I actually, to respond to, this gentleman's point about patrons wanting to see what the impacts or hear what the outcomes are going to be from art projects, that's fine and well in certain art projects, but sometimes the outcomes are unpredictable. For example, I had a work that was screened on Air New Zealand's in-flight entertainment program, and it was just responding to that context. It was a destination video for a city on Mars. And one of the criteria that they wanted me to agree to in the contract was that it wouldn't cause any adverse reactions from their passengers, and that was just something that I could not sign up to because you can't predict where people are coming from in that context, so I got them to take that out. But, you know, I think you've got to bear in mind that when you ask people to say what the impacts are going to be, you're actually excluding a lot of projects that are more experimental and that don't necessarily have outcomes that you can predict. And I guess that leads me to your comment about engaging more rural communities and getting their stories online. And I have seen some really amazing examples in the art world of community engagement, particularly from a group in Wellington called Letting Space, who have done projects, particularly they did a project in Taupō where they worked with some Auckland artists of Māori and Pacific descent to stage a mobile radio station where they went around around to community groups and halls and actually gave them the media to be able to tell their story. And I think a very similar thing could be done with, encouraging people to get online. But artists actually have a huge amount of ideas of creative ways to engage communities, and that would be a really good place to start looking for, innovative models of getting stories online in rural communities. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Hi again. I agree with what you've said. I mean, there are different reasons for applying for funding. Things aren't necessarily direct and predictable, and the same within the community sector, because that's been my recent experience. So it's really a matter of, I think, telling stories, because those stories are the compelling things that say how people are benefiting. The trust that I'm involved with runs a flagship program called Computers in Homes, and that is significantly funded by government. But how we demonstrate that that works is by telling stories and success stories. And that's the compelling side of it, and that's what gets the funders' interest. So it's the same sort of argument, isn't it? It is. Again, you're right, but I'm trying to say if something is compelling enough, it will attract interest.
All right, we've heard a lot about funding, and I think that that's really important because it's obviously organically happening from the room, but there was also a question really early on about specifically asking for success stories, and Amber's just put one up there, which is the leading space that Bronwyn was just chatting about. So I'm wondering if we can start, just as we're heading towards the end of the session, talking about some uppers, if you will. So some success stories that people have heard of. Just to kick it off, this is a bit of a subversive success story, but either last year or the year before, the Minister of Arts and Culture, Chris Finlayson, said that we were in a golden age of arts in New Zealand, and this was just after he had decommissioned a whole bunch of funding streams. And New Zealand creatives, being the amazing people that they are, took to social media with the hashtag Golden Age, which was just this kind of like beautiful subversive story about all of the, funding rounds that they'd been declined on and everything that was happening on Shortland Street, and it was a really beautiful kind of mass protest message. So leveraging off that and letting space, does anyone want to share any success stories that they can think of in their communities with an online tilt?
The 2020 Trust for some years has run a web presence called Living Heritage. And that's an opportunity for kids in schools to create websites about New Zealand heritage. It's now moved to, I gather, National Library and their platform, but it's still active and live. Again, funding is an issue. We're not funded directly from government for that. But this has been an opportunity, for example, in recent times for kids to make film and stories about World War I, part of our heritage. So that's there. It's not directly in the arts sphere, but it's part of our heritage.
This has been around for a while, but I was just wondering if people are aware of all the kete sites around the country, based in libraries largely, using the similar software around the country, where people can fill in stories about themselves, their people, put pictures up around their areas, a whole heap of community angles with their personal, with their landscape, whatever. And it's a rich resource right around the country, and it's something that everybody can contribute to because it's been made so simple to use. They could have a look at their public library and find out what they're doing. They can just look it up.
What was that? Kete. Thanks, Bronwyn. Bronwyn's just putting that up on the whiteboard now.
We've got to have more success stories than two, guys.
Yeah, no pressure.
One of the problems for artists in New Zealand is that mainstream media often won't review them, which is a really important way of getting the word out that you've got something on. So the arts community in Wellington, under the
guidance of John Smythe, set up TheatreView. I guess it's more than 5 years ago now. And the reviewers get free tickets to shows and review those shows. They don't get paid for their reviews as they would if it was in mainstream media, but it's so it's developed a whole community of people who now go and review theatre, stand-up, music, dance, all of those things, and it's become quite a useful voice for the arts community for telling their own stories, and also it has a wider audience of punters who want to know what theatre is or what's going on. And one of the downsides possibly of a site that runs reviews by people who are not professional, who are amateurs, and I mean that in the proper way, because they do it because they love it, rather than because it's their living, is that sometimes you get reviews written by people who have no expertise in reviewing the genre. So there's always a downside in that wildly, wonderfully democratic community, but it's fantastic that that one exists.
Cool. Coming.
I was just about to mention circuit again, just as you. I'll just second that. And the other thing is, well, I've been really heartened by the amount of content that's been going online about from cultural organisations that has been released under the Creative Commons. In my position, where I work, I often need to find lots of images that are that I can use, and National Library, it's just extraordinary. The kind of wonderful content that you can find there, and also DigiNZ, who aggregate all of the content that's available, or that's available under the Commons, and it's really useful place to find wonderful, useful content, New Zealand content that can be used for a variety of non-commercial purposes.
And speaking of National Library, they did a really beautiful kind of combination between a historic, almost an archive project and a art celebration called Te Rohi o Mai, which was the anniversary of the women's vote in New Zealand, and they created a live storytelling site where anyone could go on and tell their story about what they felt that it meant to be a woman in 2013, I think it was. And that was really powerful because there was also, like a visual walk-through space as well as an online walk-through space, and it was totally collaborative. So, yeah, Te Rohi o Mai, which is Look at Us Now.
Another one to look at is yours.nz, which just got some which just got some money, I understand, from the UNZ Digital Fund, and it's a student a space for students to publish content, videos, photos, whatever, but lots of video content. It's set up by Damien Christie, who's a TVNZ reporter. And he's also AUT lecturer. So AUT students are getting in there big time.
Where the heck is my screen?
Just to add to what I said earlier, I was prompted by the idea of people not being able to moderate content. The Kete websites, for example, the one set up in Horrorpreneur originally, have the software which enables the library, for example, to edit, if they absolutely had to, edit stuff out. But other people can add material. You can not only add material, you can add material onto other people's material, but the library can always at any time, if they want to, moderate.
Yeah, which is really important. How are we doing for time, Amber?
Good.
Cool.
Just wanted to mention another Coconet. Coconet's a fantastic resource. It tries to bring together all the Pacific Island communities, telling their stories, and it's a really great one to go to.
On the underrepresented groups one nobody seems to know about, some folks called Attitude Live. And they tell the stories of people with disabilities in New Zealand. And they picked up the live streaming coverage of the Paralympics when no one was doing it. Yeah, they have heaps and heaps of really great content. Attitude Live.
Kia ora. I just want to give props to the people talking about National Library. I work at Alexander Turnbull. But there's a website that I think is really, really awesome, but it's not a National Library one. It's done by the guys at Deaf Radio, and it's the signdna.org.nz website, and it's just a whole bunch of their sign language archives online, so that's another really cool one.
Any more voices who haven't spoken yet? Yep. Because we've still got quite a few minutes. Yeah.
Bronwyn, did you want to wrap up? No pressure.
Right, so I think are we out of time, Amber? Has anyone got the time to tell me if we're out of time? 11:34. So, all right, so quick wrap up. I think obviously there are a really amazing range of sites here, but there are still some gaps. I can see a really obvious gap in terms of Māori culture here. Perhaps, I don't know if anyone can build on that, but yeah, I think if the people in the room have the time and the resources to be able to help promote more New Zealand content online, then I really encourage you to do that. And I keep coming back to thinking about the void in Wikipedia of New Zealand artist representation that the Douse was trying to address, and I think that is still something that's a bit of a problem, but obviously we can see that there's some really amazing content up there. So, good work, everybody.
Thank you so much. And if people want to get in contact with the speakers today, their Twitter handles are up on the whiteboard, but for people who are watching the webcast, I'm sure that we can make sure that that's tweeted on the NetHui hashtag. So that's Holloway Smith, Dan Dosage, and Ams Craig. Thanks, everyone. Round of applause for the facilitators. Awesome. You've got off early, so you can go and have the cuppa.